Good evening. The old man here, November 23rd, 2024. What I'd like to talk about tonight is firearms, mostly collecting firearms. And the way I look at it and have looked at it for a long time is firearms are a commodity. It's a commodity that I understand pretty well. I've been in the business probably, well, like I said before, I started cleaning guns for my uncle way back when the best I can remember is I was about 10 years old. So that would be roughly 52 years. Mind you, in the beginning, it was very slow. I didn't do a lot of it, and it just built through the years. But it was always something I was extremely interested in. My uncle was in the gun business, and I just thought it was fascinating. I just loved being around guns. I loved even when I was a kid, I appreciated the engineering, loved the wood stocks, just loved walnut. So something that always fascinated me. As I started collecting firearms, in the beginning, it was just to, buy a firearm. I normally bought used so I could get a better price. I didn't need new for what I wanted to do. Mostly, I'd find a firearm, mostly in the beginning at my uncle's place, that had a good price. And it was a caliber that I'd never shot or used before. And typically, I became a reloader young too, so I could afford to shoot. Really couldn't afford, factory ammunition as much as I like to shoot. Even back in the day, I remember Kmart would have, like, say, 30-06 and 30-30 shells for $10 a box after deer season. And honestly, I couldn't really afford that, even. Not really. Not as a kid, like in my early 20s. So I started reloading, and that also became another passion that was fun. I spent most of my winters reloading. When it was too cold to shoot, I'd be out there reloading in the basement. But anyways, back to firearms. I'd buy a firearm. I like to do a trigger job on them. My favorite is probably the Remington Model 700. And I do a trigger job on them. I learned how to do trigger jobs pretty young. And I also learned how to do glass bedding pretty young too. That was something my uncle didn't have time to do, and he taught me, and I did a lot of the glass bedding back in the day. I did a lot of glass bedding for him. It was fun. It was a good thing to know. And over the years, I've done a lot of glass bedding jobs, and guys come back to me with really good reports of how well they shoot when I'm done with them. So that's always fun and satisfying as well. But at any rate, I'd buy a firearm, I'd shoot it most of the summer, have a good time with it, make it shoot as well as I could, and most of them I could make them shoot pretty damn good. Between trigger jobs, glass bedding, and fine-tuning a reload for it. I typically hunt with it that deer season, and then I'd turn it. I could always either sell it to somebody I knew, or I could turn it at a gun show, and then I'd look for another gun, with a good deal. And sometimes I already had one picked out, or, I'd have one on layaway at my uncle's place. I worked part-time for him as I got older. I worked for him part-time and never really took a wage. I always, whatever hours I made, and it was always reasonable too. I didn't make that much money, but I really didn't care. It was learning. And, I'd put that on my layaway, and about the time I was ready to get that gun out of layaway, I'd find a new home for the old one, and or the last year's model, if you will. And I'd just pull the scope off the last one and put it on the new scope, or on the new rifle, or new to me, used rifle. And then I'd start working up loads for it that winter, and I'd shoot it a bunch that summer, and on and on and on. And as the hobby got bigger and bigger, you got to remember that I always had a 40-hour job, 50-hour job, whatever. But then I've always had, especially in my younger years, I always had at least one, sometimes two more other part-time jobs. Just basically my 40-hour job was to pay the bills and what have you. And my second and third job was for investing in firearms. Sometimes my third job was going to gun shows and peddling used reloading equipment and whatever I found. My uncle took a lot of that stuff on trade and didn't have a chance to, or didn't even really have the space to sell it, let alone, by the time he paid labor for somebody to clean it up, price it, and sell it, it just didn't make sense on a lot of that stuff. So he'd sell it to me reasonable, the stuff he took on trade that, like used reload and stuff and other stuff that he didn't have room for. And he'd give me a good deal. And I'd do the gun shows during the wintertime. And again, that really helped me learn the business some more, again, dealing more with customers and how to price things. And, very good experience. But as time went by, just one firearm a year wasn't enough. Wound up buying more and more firearms. I was a sucker for wood and nice walnut stocks and blued steel. That's, to me, those things and the engineering in those guns. Not just the bolt action 700, that was my favorite, but I also bought a lot of collectible firearms. Used to see a lot of Remington 722s and 721s. 722 was a short action cartridge like the 308s and that, and the 721s was a long action cartridge like 270-06. Those were fun. I like playing with them as well. Like the old Marlins, again, wood stock and blued. Like the old Winchesters, lever actions, mostly 94s, but there was others I liked. Winchester Model 70s and a bolt action again. I like those. Again, learned how to do a trigger job on those young in life too. So I bought a few of those, not many, not like I did the Remingtons, but I bought a few Winchesters and, did trigger jobs and glass bedded them as well and made them shoot well. And that was a lot of fun. It was always a challenge. I guess I like the challenge and I like troubleshooting. But again, as time went by, I basically stuck anything and everything I had extra into firearms. I got to a point I knew the business really well. Maybe I'd go to a gun show or I'd go to a small gun shop somewhere and I seen a gun that was undervalued. I'd pick it up. Anything I knew I could turn and make 20% right away, I'd buy. And then, I just put it away in the collection. A lot of times I bought firearms, never shot them. And I'd put them away in the collection, sometimes 5 years, 10 years. Sometimes I'd see something I wanted or needed and thought it was a really good deal or whatever. And I might trade one or two off to get something that was a better grade or whatever. Maybe like I said, I'd either trade or sell them and then get the one I thought was a better gun, a better collector piece. And I just kind of built on that collection. I also like the 8s and 81s, Remington 8 and 81s. That would have been like 300 Savage, 35 Remington. Back in the day in the 8s, the Model 8s, they also made cartridges like the 30 Remington, 32 Remington. There's a few others. At least 25 Remington too, way back. But I think they quit making that one, and something like 28 or 32 comes to mind. But I liked all those old guns. The 8s and 81s were just as ugly as sin. They just were an ugly gun. They were a heavy gun. But what I really liked about them was the engineering. And, I appreciated what all went into that firearm. Funny story behind that, a lot of guys at the shop that I worked with over the years, they always Oh my God, I hate working on them 1881s. Those things are terrible. So I avoided them for years just because of what I heard. I'm like, oh damn, anytime I can kind of avoid one of those as far as tearing it apart and cleaning it and that I would. And I managed many years of not having to do one. And after I opened my business, of course, some guy comes in and wanting, I'm the only gunsmith and I don't have any backup. And back in the day, YouTube videos, you go back 15 years ago, and I don't even know if there was YouTube, but if there wasn't hardly any videos on it. I can about guarantee you that. And so I had some books on it, and so I tore into it, and at the end of the day, it wasn't that bad. I tore into it, took it all apart, and thought, well, crap, that ain't bad, and cleaned it all up and put it back together, and what the heck were them damn guys crying about all these years? But it's just one of those things, guys like to cry and whine. I guess it's something different, and I don't either didn't understand. I think a lot of it is they were afraid of it, and they didn't really understand or appreciate the engineering behind it, and kind of poo-hooed it, But damn, it was a nice gun. Again, butt ugly, and heavy, but I sure did like the engineering. But still, to this day, my favorite guns is wood and blued. It's kind of hard to warm up to that other stuff. That's not to say I don't have an AR-15 in my lineup. Sure I do. I've got many. I'm a sucker for firearms, period. But I don't really think of those as my collectible pieces. I think of those more as tools, kind of like you'd have a hammer. You got to have a hammer. You got to have a saw. Maybe you got to have a chainsaw, a circular saw, a table saw. Well, in my opinion, you got to have an AR of some sort, or maybe 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. They're a little bit addicting too. But, same thing with a handgun. I love the old classics. There's, in my opinion, as far as the collectible piece is concerned, now there's lots of collectibles out there, don't get me wrong, and so everybody loves something different. But my favorites were always the 1911s. They were always dependable. You go back 40, 50 years ago, and it was hard to find a good, dependable semi-automatic. There wasn't many out there. And most of them weren't the ones that were out there were either way too expensive or some old war relic that came back, and whether that was even any damn good, nothing about it appealed to me. As far as handguns are concerned, I like my revolvers, but as far as an auto is concerned, I always liked the 1911. I'm still a big fan of the 1911. Love it as a range gun. My only problem with it is a defensive firearm. The capacity just sucks, and they're heavy. I carried a 1911 back in the day for 10 years when I was working. Most places where I worked, it was okay to carry a firearm as long as you kept it covered up. Nobody really cared. And, you couldn't get a concealed weapons permit for the most part. I sure couldn't, let's put it that way. At that time, I wasn't a business owner, so I wasn't getting a concealed weapons permit. So, but the jobs I worked at, they either didn't know or didn't care. It wasn't a big deal. So when I carried 1911, but to tell you the truth, the damn thing was so heavy, even in my 20s, the damn thing hurt my back after carrying it for a few hours. So I wound up getting a good shoulder holster for it. My favorite shoulder holster is a Miami Classic made by Gelco. And I carried that for 10 years until the Glocks came out. And took my buddy a while to talk me into a Glock. I said, oh, them damn Tupperware guns, who wants a piece of plastic crap, Jesus Christ, it can't be any good. Well, he talked me into taking one to the range one day, and I bought one the next. I was impressed. It fed everything we could put through it.